Hey guys, so before we get into today's video, I just want to say that I don't think you will find a more serious and rigorous scholar of theology in the church than Blake Ostler.
What Joseph Smith is teaching, as I take it, is what Jesus was teaching in John 14 through 17. This kind of mutual glorification.
Blake is the author of the Exploring Mormon Thought book series and podcast with the same name, which you can find on Spotify or iTunes. Blake is fluent or semi-fluent in 9 languages, including Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and Egyptian. He will take any reader or listener on a serious, rational exploration of our theology and doctrine. So be sure to check out his book series, Exploring Mormon Thought, and or subscribe to his podcast under the same name. Sapolsky, I can't remember his name, how to say it exactly, but he in that article, his thing is like, yeah, it is all ultimately the laws of nature. Your will is determined by the laws of nature, and so ultimately it comes down to the laws of nature are the things running the show. We are essentially a chemical reaction playing itself out, and we are part of that chemical reaction, but it's just the chemical reaction is going to play itself out the way it's going to play itself out, and you can't change that, right? It's like the rock is rolling down the hill. It's going to go where it's going to go according to the laws of physics.
Great example. So
I think you gave that example before.
Yes, I did. In fact, I wrote when I was starting off in philosophy, and I was going to do a master's in neuroscience, and I wrote a paper on this subject for one of my professors who what's his name? Sapolsky, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's Sapolsky.
He was also a hard determinist, and I gave this example. I said, look, you can compare. Do either of you ski?
I do.
When I was a kid, yeah.
I've never been skiing, so bear with me here. So you roll a boulder down a mountain. The ball just keeps going, gaining momentum, and eventually, if it flattens out, it'll stop. If not, it'll just roll on forever. Okay, you go down that same mountain. You can understand that you can speed up, you can slow down, you can go this way, you can go that way, you can do jumps and tricks, and you can understand what you do can affect the future of what's about to come. So that shows you, even though you're governed by the same laws, even though you are just as physical as the rock, you have a sense of responsibility that the rock doesn't. For example, if you saw, let's say there's a kid in front of you on the way down the hill. If you're a skier, you can know, okay, either I can move out of the way or I can just bear down and I could knock the kid down. You'd be responsible for that. The rock would just crush the kid, keep moving. We wouldn't prosecute the rock for what it did to the kid. So it shows you, again, just being physical and law governed doesn't mean that you don't have any control or responsibility in what's going on. And as long as you can see that's all the compatibilist really needs to have free will.
Okay.
Now, I would say this, and I think this is what you're getting at. The way we've been describing free will, if you're a compatibilist, it doesn't seem to capture kind of the magical wonder sometimes of what you might think of when you think of free will from a common sense layperson perspective. But there you are.
So let's take a look at this real quick. So this is the way that I frame it and why I would say I'm an incompatibilist, at least as far as sort of the definition of determinism that I put out. And maybe it is, but I look at, okay, so you have a stimulus, A, it by necessity of the laws of nature produces response B. If I pour oil into water, they will separate, right? It is determined by the laws of nature that stimulus A will result in response B. Now, actually, I got this from Stephen Covey, and his book, I remember when I read this in his book and I saw this diagram, I thought it was really brilliant. And it's been the way that I've thought about free will basically ever since. And that is that human beings are different in that we are hit by influences. The gravity does pull us down the hill as the skier, right? Like there are things that are beyond our control. These are what I would call also influences, but that we choose our response to those influences to the degree that we can, right? To the degree that there are options available, we have the capacity to choose if I'm going to go left around that tree, right around that tree, or if I'm going to go down the hill at all. And so, but obviously once I'm going down the hill, I have limited the options because there are forces that can constrain what I say is my freedom or the options available to me. But amongst the options available, I still have a capacity to kind of go left and right. Right. And one other example of this that I would point to is, and Covey talks about it in his book, is the last of all human freedoms, right? That Viktor Frankl talked about when he was in the concentration camp. He said, look, all of these external stimulus can exist, but I always have the ability to choose how I'm going to respond to the stimulus that are given to me, right? Mm-hmm. And so the question I ask is, the hard determinist would look at that and say, nope, this is not the way it is, because ultimately, let's go back to that word, ultimately, any way you choose to respond is due to your upbringing, due to the neurochemistry that you have, due to the circumstances that you're in. And so how you respond, response B, is ultimately determined by stimulus A, which can be a massive amount of various things that make up who you are. So that's the way I kind of view the two options that are available. And I'm curious, is that off? What am I missing?
No. I mean, I don't think it's off exactly. I just think that when you think about free will, as most people do, which is you need to have some kind of significant control over your actions, and there have to be multiple possibilities open to you. And I just think that is compatible with determinism. So like you're saying like stimulus A is going to necessitate the reaction B. But I just don't think that is a problem for freedom or responsibility. So Dennett gives this example in Elbow Room, where he talks about Martin Luther saying, "I can do no other," when he was told to recant. And he said this, his conscience compels him. He can't ignore it. He can do no other. And Dennett says, well, look, whatever he was trying to do, he was not trying to duck responsibility. He was not saying, well, I can do no other, so I'm not responsible. So you can be in a situation where you can't really do otherwise, but you still clearly feel responsible for what you did. So like
just because you feel responsible doesn't mean you actually are. If I have an epileptic seizure,
he is
and because of that,
I mean, like he like his conscience is the reason that he couldn't do otherwise. So like Dennett gives this other example where he says, like, you can bribe me $1,000 to torture someone. I'm just never going to do it. Like you can say, here's $1,000. Like, if you go torture that guy, it's yours. He's like, look, I'm never going to do that. Like I can do no other. Like you're not going to bribe me for, you're not going to give me $1,000 and, entice me to torture someone. But if you ask why that is, responsibility still ultimately lies with me. It is because of me and my nature and the way that I am. That's why I can do no other. And that's why I'm responsible, because of my nature and who I am. So here, I don't really have alternate possibilities in this deep sense that an incompatibilist wants, but I still have moral responsibility.
I also would object a little bit. I think that your illustration uses a really good point. So you talked about, I think it was water and oil kind of separating due to laws of nature. Well, let's step back a little bit. This is actually relevant to my work in physics. So what exactly do you think laws of nature are? Because I think this is actually a big component of this.
And that's the thing. Are they a description of what happens in the physical world, or are they the actual cause of what happens in the world? And I think that in my mind is, but then it begs the question, well, then what the heck is the cause? Right.
So the reason I bring that up is because certain people who are incompatibilists try to run this type of laws of nature argument just to show why compatibilism can't work. Peter van Inwagen is the most principal advocate of this incompatibilist argument, where he says, okay, if determinism is true, then what's happens is the result of laws of nature in the past, and I'm not responsible for the laws of nature or the past, so I can't be responsible for what I do. So that's the whole thing. Now, there are a few things wrong with that. First of all, I would take the view, first of all, that laws of nature are just descriptions of what happens. They're not things. So laws of nature don't cause anything. You could, frankly, I'm somewhat becoming kind of an eliminativist about laws of nature. It's like, I think you should just stop talking about it that way, because too many people think that there's like the physical stuff and then there's these like things that make it do that, what it does, rather than just saying, this is what happens. There you go. So you take that part out. The other is, we have very good examples like from biology. You can, and Emerson was talking about this and from the same book, where Dennett talks about you can stimulate a type of a beetle, and they'll for a lot of types of beetles, they'll just keep running into the stimulus. But if you certain types of beetles, they will react and not go towards it anymore. The same thing would be true of a dog. If you kick a dog, it can feel pain and be like, you know what, if I do this, this tends to happen. So the same is kind of true of human beings. It's true that there were physical matter and things like that, but we do have abilities that things like water and oil don't. We can understand why things happen. We can make predictions. We can have reservations. We can weigh among options, even though we are law-governed things. And that's all you really need for moral responsibility, is to have it be the case that did the person understand what they were doing? Did they understand what would happen? Do they understand why they should or shouldn't do that? And then if they do, then we'll say that person was free and it's morally responsible. And if not, then we won't hold them morally responsible. There are lots of people who don't have free will. For example, I have a soon-to-be 1-year-old baby. Audrey doesn't have free will. She doesn't know why she does what she does. So she's not free and morally responsible. Chloe is 3. She's turning 4. So she's got a little bit of free will. And then people like me and yourself, we have a lot more. And as we age, things will change. But we have degrees of freedom that are all we need for moral responsibility. We don't need to make ourselves special in order to have free will.
Well, and I would look at it and say, I going back to sort of this idea of agency and free will. Okay. I look at it as agency as our ability to choose between options. Now, obviously your daughter, or I have a 4-year-old son right now, and I have 4 kids. So I know how it goes when they're younger, and they're not morally responsible because their level of capacity to choose between those options is much more limited because of a lack of knowledge and other things. However, as we grow, it's like almost like our capacity to understand and to choose between options, and therefore our moral accountability for the choices that we make becomes more. I use this analogy. I say we're animals, but we don't have to be, right? Like we are influenced by all of these natural forces, but
we're more than our impulses, is what you're saying, I think.
Exactly. And that capacity is what makes us a human being, right? That's something that the ability to reason and do those sorts of things, we're larger. I wouldn't say we're different maybe in kind to a certain degree we are ultimately animals in that sense, but we are a very, very special animal that can do things that no other animal seems to be able to do. And therefore that's why when a lion kills a zebra, we don't charge it with murder and put him in lion jail. But I want to say something to what you said, Emerson, where you said you were talking about kind of who you are, but do you have any control over who you are? Right? Like if you're making choices because of your character, but isn't your character ultimately, and I use that word, ultimately shaped by forces outside of your control? And so if you were born in Afghanistan, you'd be someone totally different?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I hope that the libertarian or incompatibilist view can accommodate the fact that if we were born in Afghanistan, we'd be different. So yeah, I mean, of course I'd be different, but it's like, my character does determine what I do in part. And if you just want to take a step back and say, yeah, but why do you have that character? It's like, well, that's an interesting question, but it doesn't change the fact that I do what I do in part because of the way that I am. So it's kind of like, this is something the incompatibilist does a lot that kind of bothers me, because it's like if I said, well, hang on, that faucet over there is a source of water. And I feel like the incompatibilist would say, well, no, it's not, because it's connected to pipes. It's like, well, no, the faucet is a source of water. Just because you can go a little farther back in the chain doesn't mean the faucet is somehow not a source. So it's like, I am the source of my actions. And you say, well, hang on, if you had different genes, you'd be behaving differently. It's like, well, yeah, but I'm still the source of my actions. I don't have to be like the unmoved mover to be the source of my actions. Just like the faucet can be a source of water without being like, spontaneously creating water that pops into existence every time I turn the faucet on.
See, and I real quick on that, I think my theory is that we all are unmoved movers. We have that capacity. That's what agency is.
But
it's
you can
the
still
ability to
be a source, though, without being an unmoved mover.
Well, I would say it in this sense. I can receive stimulus by my character, my upbringing, my environment, but every time I make a choice, I am choosing the response to that stimulus, and that shapes my character. The more I make certain choices, the more my character changes, and I actually alter the sort of being that I am. And so my future of what I am is not determined merely by antecedent causes, but rather by the way that I respond to the stimuluses that I get. Now, am I wrong?
Okay, let's. I will answer that.
If you'd like to see the full episode, please see the link in the video description. So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.